for joining us, and welcome to Harvest Space.
Great. Thanks, Samantha. Very nice to be here. So thanks very much for coming in the afternoon, especially in August. I know it's hot and it's busy. I hope what I'm going to do in the next sort of 20 minutes or so is just give a perspective on some of the considerations for people who are thinking either maybe one day working with technology companies that have an impact focus or an impact purpose, or if there's any folks out there thinking about starting their own company, some of the considerations, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities, some of the stuff that I have definitely screwed up over the past couple of years. I'll share a little bit of that if that'd be helpful. Really quick background before we get started. So my name is Toby Norman. I started my career actually as a public health researcher. So I was a global health researcher. I started at Harvard, then at the University of Cambridge. I worked in Bangladesh for 4 years studying frontline health programs. I got really interested in the question of technology, using that for social purpose. And then started my own company. I've been doing that for 7 years now, which has been a ton of fun. I'll tell you a little about it, what we've done well, some of the stuff I really wish I knew before we got started in this journey, and hopefully some of those things will be useful. Just before we get started, I would love to know in this group, who here is thinking about maybe starting their own company one day? Hands up. You don't have to know for certain, just on the radar, maybe. Okay. Who is hoping to join a tech company one day? So going into the technology space, join a tech company, a couple folks. Is anyone thinking about doing an impact first or social purpose organization, either joining or starting? Has it crossed the radar even a little bit? 1, 2, okay. We've got a few. What I would love to do, if I can, by the end of this, is maybe convince 1 or 2 more people in this group and this organization that's a viable pathway. It's a ton of fun. It's increasingly a pathway that can economically work, and you can build really successful companies that have social purpose, but also some of the stuff to think about if you're making that decision or think about going that route. Let me just share a tiny bit. We're going to start with the glossy stuff, right? So like, what do we do? How do we do it? It's really boring if I describe my own organization too much, so I'm just going to do 2 minutes. This is the nice glossy piece. And then what I want to do is get under the hood a little bit and talk about, okay, what does this look like from the inside? What's it really like? But this is something our partners put together. Give us a quick introduction about what we do.
Because there isn't a consistent way of identifying patients, it's very difficult to track whether this particular patient has received this dose of vaccine. Let's assume that the mother has not been registered at all. What will happen is that their records will be taken on the e-tracker platform. And then in addition to taking their biodata, their fingerprints would also be collected.
What I saw here is going to help us a lot, because sometimes you have to take book along, sometimes your book, maybe the book got missing. So I'm impressed. I'm very happy about the new process.
Another very good functionality about the tracker is the fact that it allows clients who cross geographical locations. So let's say a client moves from one facility to another facility within the same district, or let's say across regions. If tracker is deployed in all of these facilities, it's easier to search for the client and then continue with the service. And in that way, it helps to improve on the continuity of care.
That's the glossy bit, right? So that was produced by Gavi. That's the world's largest procurer of vaccines anywhere in the world. Folks, most of us, I'm assuming, have had a COVID vaccine. Gavi is the procurement facility that pools COVID vaccine purchases for a huge number of countries, largely in Africa and South Asia. And what we're doing is working with them and a bunch of other partners to be able to link things like vaccines to unique patient records. So that's the gloss of it. That's what it looks like on the surface. What I want to dig into a little bit is, okay, what's under the hood of this stuff, right? So if you're either thinking about joining a technology company that has an impact mission, or at least a tangential impact mission, or you're thinking about starting one, a couple of things that would be useful as you go through that journey or make that evaluation. Number one, I'm sure we've all seen this at some point because HarborSpace is doing an excellent job on the training. As anyone not familiar with product market fit is a concept, totally fine if not, but I think all of us have come across this. Roughly, what's our guess? Anyone want to volunteer? How many companies succeed in finding that piece? Depends on data sources who you ask. Does anyone want to throw out a number? What percentage of organizations, new companies, succeed in finding product market fit?
10,
5, 10, 30, no? 3%. That's super precise. I like it. Okay. 3, so we're hearing between 3 to 10%. Based on who you talk to, who you ask, that's right. So roughly, very roughly, 1 in 10 organizations succeed. Most fail. It depends where you look. It depends how you evaluate. It depends, which type of sector you're in. But roughly a very, very small fraction of all organizations that start succeed in finding that product market fit piece. If you were thinking about joining an impact organization, what you were trying to do is you're trying to join an organization that has found product market fit or build your own, that in addition to doing those two very difficult things, is trying to create social purpose or impact at the same time. Now, Smart Group, is this space bigger or smaller than product market fit? Smaller, right? We've got, if you're trying to find a place where you genuinely have product market fit, a lot of organizations have either 0 social impact as a consequence of the work they do, or in some organizations, negative social impact as a consequence of the work they do. So you are looking for a smaller target if you're trying to do it. It's achievable, it's there, but here are a couple of the considerations if you're going to be looking for that smaller target, either to join an organization like that or potentially to start one. We're not going to go into the glossy stuff. I just want to pull back the hood and share some reflections about what happens if you're trying to do this, and a few things I wish someone had told me before starting this process and building this organization for the past 7 years that focus here. We're going to just talk about 3 things, keep it really simple. 1, talking about proximity to the problem. I'll use my own experiences, but I want to really stress and articulate and share why that is so bloody important, and why if you don't do that, either evaluating the organization, do they do this, or starting your own, it's going to cause a lot of pain down the line. 2, designing for that problem and being really clear about the problem that you are designing for is the problem that you are solving for your users or for social impact, not the problem that your investors have, because they have different problems, different sets of problems. And I've seen a lot of really smart social entrepreneurs struggle with that distinction, and they get in trouble, big trouble down the line. And 3rd, find people to pay you, and I hope this is going to be the fun, controversial part of the talk, that if we have any investors or venture capitalists, not all will agree with this, so I want to be a little controversial here. If those people don't exist yet, how to create them? Because it's possible that if that market does not exist yet, you can generate it, but there's some pros and cons to doing that. We'll have a really candid conversation about that. So let's dig in, talking about the problem first. For us, the problem we're working on is very straightforward. It's about 1 billion people worldwide, that's roughly 1 in 7 people on the planet, don't have any formal ID. So most of us here have some type of NIE. Raise your hand if you've got an NIE. Hopefully most. Or if you're from someplace else, do you have an equivalent of a social security number or passport? Raise your hand if you got a passport. Who's got a passport in this room? I assume every single person here has a passport. These are formal identities. These are legal identities that we can use, but they can also connect us to a range of services. About 1 in 7 people on the planet, so that's probably you, this row here, gone, right? Don't have those things, so functionally invisible in the eyes of the folks they work with. And this has a bunch of really nasty consequences, but one of the thorny consequences is it makes it very hard to link someone, for example, to a consistent vaccine record, to a consistent health record, to any type of humanitarian aid or services or things like that. This is the problem, right, on paper. This is what it looks like. What does it actually mean to get close to a problem, to live and breathe it? For me, The only reason I'm familiar with this at all is because I worked with frontline health workers for years in a context. There has been almost nothing more useful in our work at Simprints than the fact that every time we have a fight with a partner, an investor, a teammate, whatever the challenge is, being able to go and reference and say, look, when I was following health workers, this is what they saw. This is what they lived. This is what they breathed. They were trying to connect mums to healthcare records, and they couldn't do it, and this is why. That proximity to the problem has been useful in almost every conversation I've had in the past 7 years. If I didn't have that proximity, I would really struggle to articulate why is what we're doing important to a range of stakeholders. One of the things I screwed up, and I screwed up really badly 3 years ago, is we got into a growth phase, we were hiring a bunch of people, we raised about sort of $30 million at this point, and I spent maybe 2.5 years, and then we had the pandemic, getting further away from the problem and getting more into running the business, hiring people, worrying about budgets, worrying about finance. That disconnect from the problem was one of the worst mistakes I made in 7 years of CEO, because what it meant is I could frequently less and less go back to the problem when we were making product decisions about what to build, when we were talking to team members, and when the Great Recession hit, trying to convince team members this is an important problem to work on, and talking to funders. You know, we got down to 1.2 months worth of runway, and there was a bunch of reasons that happened. But if I was going to tie it back consistently to one of the core screw-ups I made, getting further away from the problem. And I'm changing that now. We fixed that. I'm going back on field sites. I'm going back to field visits. I'm getting closer to that user group. But I really wish someone had grabbed me by the scruff of the neck years ago and say, whatever you do on this journey, whether you're working for someone else or you're starting your own, stay in tight proximity to the problem over time. A couple concrete things to do that. One, stories. Stories are powerful, right? Anyone here heard of Brené Brown? Any fans of Brené Brown? Love it. One of the favorite things that she says that I really adore is if you have the story and if you have the data, you've got them. This is not my story. This is a true story. This is a story from our chief delivery officer. He worked on the Syria crisis response for many years, first at Oxfam and World Vision, two really powerful NGOs. The story he told was the fact that during the crisis, during his sort of time working on crisis response in that region, in Yemen, literally $4 billion of aid went into the country, which was enough to feed every single person in that country twice over with aid during the Yemen crisis. During that time period, many children, and this is a real child, Nasafa says, died of hunger because the aid was stolen and his father was unable to go to the local market and buy back what was supposed to be free food subsidies for his own kid. So think about this. Your dad, you know that there is billions of dollars of sort of international relief flowing into the country. You go to the food store where you're supposed to be able to get this for free. They claim that they're out of stock, out of supplies, there's nothing there. You get small cash transfers, small amounts of humanitarian assistance. You go to the local market, you see the stolen foodstuffs, right? Still has the World Food Program logo on the side of it. And you were told you need to buy this back, and the prices are way up, and you don't have enough money to buy back what was supposed to be free aid for you. And as a consequence, one of your children dies of hunger, which is insane in this day and age that this happens. That story, to me, is one of the most powerful things that Steve has shared in the 7 years that we've been working together. When I hear that story, I get the pull, I get the engagement. The story is not enough by itself. We're going to need numbers. A lot of the work we do is around that data science, so it's actually really articulating very clearly to programs, okay, exactly how much of a problem is this, and if I'm going to convince you, as a potential partner, to give me and my organization money, I don't just need a story, the story can get the hook, but we need numbers. So for example, with a lot of programs we work with, they struggle with this. They're trying to make sure goods, stuff, health, vaccines, whatever it is, getting to the right person. But a lot of it is not reaching. And if we can't articulate that quantitatively, they're not going to buy in. They're not going to come on the journey with us. So I wish someone had told me when I got started on this, we need that 1-2 punch constantly, but stories to make it real, right? That better be true stories. False stories are not the way to go. True stories, but then back it up with the numbers, the quantitative numbers to build the buy-in. And if you do those two things, then make sure you're convincing the world the market is big enough. right? 1 billion people is a pretty big number. That is a big enough market. And it's no different, for example, if you're trying to raise capital in purely for-profit, non-purpose-driven organizations to purpose-driven organizations. This is one place where the overlap is there. It's much easier to sell what you're doing if you convince people there is significant, serious market demand for it and the problem scale is big enough. The reason that's valuable, the reason that really helps, is that any good investor, any good partner, any good donor partner is going to know that you are imperfect, you're going to screw it up, it's going to take you longer than you think, and it's going to be more expensive than you promised them in your fancy slide deck. But if the problem is big enough, you will find a way and the market will course correct and pull you into doing it. And so this is one of the things that if I had known this when we started would have been way easier. That combination 1-2 punch, and then make sure you're articulating something that's big enough problem to grab people. Next challenge, designing for that problem. It is really easy, it's really tempting to design for the problem with the people who are initially giving money, which might be investors. In some tech companies that are doing social purpose, they might be donors. But they have problems that they are trying to solve, which is usually around their pipeline, and it's usually around what they need to convince their stakeholders to back their investments. Tricky thing is that if you screw it up, can become what you think is the main problem and your main role, either when you're joining the organization or if you're starting your own. So, problem we're solving for, make it really simple in our case. What we're trying to build, ethical and inclusive digital ID that allows people to link to services and verify that poverty-fighting services, could be a vaccine, could be humanitarian aid, but is reaching the right person at the right time. This is what we're solving for. This is what we're building towards. Articulating that always has to be around the users, right? So in this case, our users are going to be frontline workers, say a frontline aid worker. One of the screw-ups I made really early on in our journey, and I got this very badly wrong, we were working on the initial design of this technology. We're thinking we're going to start with fingerprints, right? Everyone's got a fingerprint, it's universal, they were just starting to get introduced in phones. Let's start with fingerprints, and we're going to use a fingerprint sensor, and then I'm going to go to this conference in DC, and I'm going to convince the global health investors there that fingerprints is the way to go. And the conference was a huge success. We raised about $250,000, which out the gate for us, we had previously just been students, so this was like our first $250K investment. Holy shit, we feel great, everything is good. I've convinced them we've got this cool, nifty little prototype that has a fingerprint sensor in it. Brilliant, I have solved the problem. Wrong, screw up. I had solved the investors' problem. The investors needed a credible, cool, sexy idea to take to the people who they get money from and say, we're making a good bet here. What I had not solved for was the user's problem, and the user's problem is that sure, all of their patients have fingerprints, but they don't look anything like my hands. I have super white, super soft, super gentle hands, spent most of my life on a keyboard. Their patients, who they're working with, for example, in urban slums, in Bangladesh, in rural farms in Tanzania or Kenya, scarred, worn, badly damaged fingerprints that have often spent years and years and years in manual labor. If you spend 10 years pulling a rickshaw, if you spend 15 years with a hoe, if, for example, you are a woman cooking, and this is really common, with literally cooking pots that you lift off a hot stove without pads, you get thermal burns on your fingerprints. I had solved for the investor's problem with this concept. I had not solved for the user's problem. And it took a ton of research, took a ton of research to backtrack from this and actually design, it took about 2 years to fix this, to design and build fingerprint technology that was designed for scarred, worn, and damaged fingerprints, not fingerprints that look like mine, right? Because I had solved the wrong problem at that point in time. I was solving for the investor's problem. I wasn't solving for the user's problem. Coming to the more positive side of it, when you do solve for that problem, using data to show people that you've solved the problem was really powerful. This is when I think about 4 years ago when we started to get traction on the market. This was one of the things we were able to do. When we were actually able to improve the accuracy, it took 2 years. We got about a 228% improvement in fingerprint accuracy for scarred, worn, damaged prints. We were able to start showing that aid services, health services, and similar were getting delivered in real time. And that was powerful because now we're going back not just to investors, but we're going back to clients, partners, government officials, and others, showing, hey, if you're going to spend money on this, we can prove that it gets to the right person at the right time. And again, that combination of story and data came up here as well, not just as a theme for investors, but as a theme for when you're trying to convince clients and other partners to come on the journey with you, a powerful way to get them to buy in. When we come to the story side, we're going to keep coming to a couple of similar themes. Getting feedback from those partners still to date has been one of the most effective things we do. So if any of you think about starting your own organization, never hesitate to go and get raw interview data and raw story data from the people you serve. This is a quote from Rashida Ferrand. She's a professor at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. This moved me massively. It wasn't our biggest client, wasn't our highest paying client, but if there was one thing that aligned the team, got them excited, got our donors and partners excited, seeing this type of result from those clients and just capturing it, not trying to describe it in my own words, but just capturing that and putting it there was a really powerful approach that helped us get a ton of traction with those folks. One final thing I'll say, and this is going to be a little different for those who are thinking about impact organizations in this space. One thing that's a little different that you may have to do, either working for one or starting for one, is do an extra layer of diligence in terms of the impact you create, right? It's more straightforward for my friends who work, for example, for VC-backed organizations. Their metrics are pretty straightforward, and the numbers at the end of the day don't lie in terms of are they growing, are they adding users, are they adding revenue? It's clean, it's simple, it's clear. If we're trying to do that third circle, right? So if we're trying to add an impact layer to the work that we're doing, you are going to get asked a ton more questions about how do you know this impact is real, right? Because the revenues, it's very straightforward. You either lied about your revenues or you didn't. They can send in a team of auditors to check out, is this true? You know, Deloitte or PwC shows up at your door, they're going to know really quickly, did you make up your revenues or is this revenue data real? A lot harder when you say, okay, we've done social impact, we've reduced carbon emissions. Right, but how do we know that's real? You know, how many of us have our own doubts about when you see things like, you know, carbon capture or, you know, carbon offsetting schemes? Is this really legit? If we thought about donating to charities, how many of us has asked the question, do I really believe in the impact of this organization? You're going to need a lot more rigorous proof if you want to add that impact circle to what you're doing and what you're looking for. Bunch of ways to do that. If there's any folks who want to talk about that, I'm happy to talk more in depth about the techniques. But more broadly, the punchline, the takeaway, is that you'll have to add an extra layer of rigor if you're going to prove that out and convince people. And there are tools you can use like randomized control trials, difference in difference methodologies, a wide variety of impact metrics. But if you're going to do that, you will need that extra layer of data to convince people, and that's going to be one of the most powerful things you'll have to do either working for or running your own organization. Final thing, let's end with something more challenging but hopefully interesting. Finding people to pay you. Every CEO entrepreneur loves to stick something like this up during the presentation. We work in all these countries. How fantastic is this? We've worked in 17 different countries, a bunch of different ministries. You stick the logos of your big name partners. Now feel these are the big name partners in global health. Stick their logos up. That feels really good. And they like even more to do this. I love this graph. I show this graph all the time, right? These are cumulative enrollments over time. This is when we started. This is when I screwed up the thing around the fingerprints. This is when we were starting to fix it. This is when we fixed it and it started to go. This starts to go up. We're doing multi-year projects, so we care about cumulative patient enrollments. Now over 2.5, approaching 3 million across our projects. That's great. 3 million users. Everyone feels good about that. There's something hidden on this graph. Anyone want to guess, what do you think our revenues look like? Yeah, the crash. Fortunately, not the total debt crash, or I would not be here. I would not have the time for this. But the correlation between our revenues and our user growth is shockingly disconnected, right? Which is a little crazy, right? You would think as your users go up, your revenue is surely soaring, and we're spending all of our time partying on the beach. No. Particularly, this is true in many sectors because it's easy to get free users. It is especially hard if you're thinking about an impact organization where there could be a deep disconnect between your impact, and this for us is impact, right? These are actual patients receiving actual vaccines or medicines, but the connect between our revenues can be super weak. And in this case, that's totally true for us. In reality, our revenue thing looks more like a bumpy line, but it doesn't have that tight correlation between those two. Why is that? Well, bunch of reasons. One of the most powerful reasons, though, is that actually getting people to pay to do impact work is really hard. And often the projects that get a little money are glossy, sell super well, but it doesn't really matter if you reach 10 patients with your cool, sexy food kitchen intervention, or you've reached 100 people or 200 people. Your ability to sell is really disconnected from that user base, especially if the people you're impacting aren't paying for the services. Then there's going to be a big disconnect there. If you come into that situation where there is that disconnect and you're looking for it, a couple things that I wish someone had told me as we started. First, if you got venture capitalist-backed finance, this is going to be hard. They like to see markets that might be new, but the market is there. So if you tell them our goal is to create a new market, a lot of them are going to walk. Not impossible, but a hard slog. There are other sources of capital that won't walk and will believe it if say we are going to create a market of people who will pay for this, but it's going to take some time and it's going to take some grit. I'll share our experience. I don't know all the ways to do this, but what worked for us was we did two things. First, we created an enemy. We created a common enemy for people to get frustrated and annoyed by the way things were existing, the way things that were done. Right? This is a trope in sort of many societies and civilizations. People rally when there's a common thing to fight against. In this case, we took a look at, there's an existing biometrics market that sucks and really badly serves people who need help, right? It's high cost. There's a big risk of vendor lock-ins. These vendors will come in and secure these big government contracts, and then you're going to be stuck on their proprietary tech and you can't get out. That's an argument that resonates really well because it's not a false argument, it's real. This has happened in many, many times, particularly across parts of East and West Africa. Governments have been locked into low quality services that they can't get out of. Third, and our digital rights friends love this, it's exclusive and it's unaccountable, right? It's really exclusive technology, it's difficult to access, and there's no accountability. There's no auditability to see, is this accurate, is this valid, is this actually, for example, not suffering from racial, ethnic, or gender bias, which exists and are huge problems in a lot of the biometric tech that's out there. By creating that common opposition, this is what we want to be. We're able to rally a lot more of our clients and a lot more of our partners to say, okay, it's a stretch, but I believe we could potentially be part of your market here, right? Or we could help you create this market here. Second thing, finding partners who are going to back you and stick their name brand next to you. If you're going to go down this route and try and create new payers, new market, really helps. I thought this was enough. This feels good. Bunch of conferences, bunch of names, bunch of logos. This was not enough. This was like 2 years worth of effort, not closely enough. We ultimately had to go this way, which is getting a huge number of organizations to sign letters of support and sign up for the work we're doing and say this would be useful if we can build a market that will actually pay for and demand these services as standard within the global health sector. And we eventually got off organizations that, I kid you not, literally the groups here are serving about 1/3 of the world's population. This was another 2 years worth of effort. But by getting enough of the people who are serving enough folks on the planet, convincing them that this problem is real, if there was good quality, and outkicker, we said we'd make the whole thing open source. Good quality open source tools that could help them solve their problems. Can we get folks to pay for this? That to us started to get to that tipping point. Had to make a bunch of arguments about how we do that, why we do that. One of the things I'd really consider people who think about impact careers, impact focused organizations, is the open source route. There's a bunch of really successful, fully open source companies, some purely for profit. Took it Red Hat, for example, acquired 34 billion by IBM. Huge organization, open source tools. A lot of people love working and building on these types of tools and architecture. But whatever you do, if you are trying to convince people that the market doesn't exist yet, but this market could exist, and by having a common thing to fight against and showing enough support and demand for it, you can convince people to start paying for what they weren't previously paying for. And that's what we did. We convinced enough, both government funders, so people who are buying these services, for example, vaccine tracking services, donor partners, so organizations, for example, like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and others who are actually spending money on NGOs and NGO programs, as well as actual implementing partners themselves. These could be big NGOs, this could be a Ministry of Health and Country. Today they're not paying for these services, tomorrow they could be, and they should be. And so last year we had our biggest year yet in terms of revenues. That line started to tilt up. This year we've done even better. So far 8 million closed and growing behind that revenues. This is a market that previously when we started did not exist. It is still super early and it's super hard and it's a graft, right? And if you're looking to raise VC capital, that you should hopefully be a little closer here because you're trying to get to here. We started here. We're just getting to this point, and it will be another 10 years easily for us to get to the tipping point there. But coming back to where we started, if you can do those things, getting super, super close to the problem, having that proximity so it's literally at your fingertips, don't do what I did, which was a huge screw up and got a little far away from it. If you can really design for that particular problem, not your investor's problem, not someone else's problem, but the problem that you are solving for on behalf of your users. And if you can find people to pay for that work, or if they don't exist, go create them and convince them they need to pay for that work, you'll be in a much, much stronger position to actually find that place where technology, economics like business, and impact potentially meet. And if you do, you can do some really cool stuff. Let me stop there, and Stefano, thank you very much for inviting me today. Really nice to chat to some other folks. If there's any questions, welcome, but otherwise, thanks very much for having me.
Anyone has a question or comment for Toby?
Just keep going.